What my sister-in-law didn't know was that a private investigator had been documenting everything for the past 3 months. What she didn't know was that my late wife's estate attorney was sitting in the same hotel lobby watching. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror that I've been meaning to fix for 2 years. I shop at Costco, I cut my own grass, and I wear the same pair of New Balance sneakers I bought on clearance 4 years ago. I don't look like a man who matters. That's always been my greatest advantage. My wife, Carol, passed away 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 31 years together, and I would trade every single one of those years again if it meant I got to keep her. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, who kept a spare umbrella in her car for strangers, who made the best pot roast you've ever tasted and refused to share the recipe with anyone except me. She was also, as it turned out, considerably more organized about her final wishes than anyone in her family ever gave her credit for. Carol's younger sister is named Diane. Diane married a man named Philip 12 years ago. And somewhere along the way, Philip convinced Diane that Carol's family money, their mother's money, specifically should have always belonged to Diane. That's the kind of thought that gets planted slowly and grows into something ugly. By the time Carol got sick, Diane and Philip had already started making plans. I didn't know the extent of it until about 4 months after the funeral. Carol's mother, Eleanor, is 81 years old and still sharp as a tack. She lives in a large house in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a caretaker named Rosa, who has been with her for 11 years. Eleanor has money, real money, the kind that came from Carol's late father, who built a regional trucking company from nothing and sold it in 2001 for more than anyone expected. After he died, Eleanor managed that money quietly and carefully. She never talked about it. She drove a sensible car, lived in the same house she'd lived in for 30 years, and wrote checks to her church every month. Diane always knew the money was there. She just assumed she'd be the one to receive most of it, because Carol had married me, a high school shop teacher from Ohio, and Diane had married Philip, who wore Italian shoes and managed other people's investments. In Diane's mind, Carol had chosen a smaller life. In Diane's mind, that meant Carol's share should drift naturally toward her. What Diane didn't account for was how much Eleanor loved Carol, and how much Eleanor, by extension, respected me for taking care of her daughter through 31 years and 11 months of marriage, including the last 14 months of Carol's life, when I slept in a recliner next to her hospital bed more nights than I slept in my own bedroom. The first sign that something was wrong came in February. Eleanor called me on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual because we normally talked on Thursdays. She sounded careful, like she was choosing her words. "Gerald," she said, "has Diane contacted you recently about the Scottsdale property?" I told her no. I asked why. There was a pause. "She came by last Tuesday with Philip. They brought a real estate agent." I didn't say anything for a moment. "A real estate agent for your house?" They said they were just being proactive, planning ahead. Another pause. "They also brought some paperwork they wanted me to look at." I asked her if she'd signed anything. "No," she said. "Rosa was here. She gave me a look. So I told them I'd have my attorney review it first." Rosa had been with Eleanor for 11 years. She had very good instincts. I drove down to Scottsdale the following weekend. Eleanor showed me the documents. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd been a union representative for 9 years, and I know what a power of attorney form looks like. Philip had brought one. It would have given Diane significant control over Eleanor's financial decisions. It was dressed up in careful language, but that's what it was. I didn't say much in front of Eleanor. I didn't want to frighten her or make her feel like the walls were closing in. But I drove home with a cold, settled feeling in my chest that I hadn't felt since the day Carol's oncologist stopped talking about treatment options. I called an attorney the following Monday. Not just any attorney. I called Martin Reeves, who had been Carol's estate attorney for 20 years, and who I knew Eleanor trusted completely. I told him what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Gerald, I think you need to hear some things about Eleanor's estate plan that you may not be aware of." What Martin told me over the next hour rearranged everything I thought I understood about my situation. Carol and Eleanor had updated Eleanor's trust together, 2 years before Carol got sick. Carol had known, even then, that Diane's marriage to Philip had changed her sister in ways that worried her. The trust, as it stood, left the Scottsdale property and the majority of the liquid assets in a structure that prioritized Carol's line first. Since Carol had passed, that meant me, not Diane, not Philip, me. There was also a clause, and this is the part that Carol, being Carol, had thought through very carefully, stating that if any beneficiary attempted to exert undue influence over Eleanor's decisions in the 5 years preceding Eleanor's death, that beneficiary would be removed from consideration entirely. Martin told me that Eleanor had called him herself 2 days after Diane's visit to make sure the documentation of that visit was on record. Eleanor, it turned out, had been protecting herself long before I showed up. The family reunion was scheduled for late April. Eleanor hosted it every year at her house in Scottsdale, a tradition that went back decades, when Carol's father was still alive and would grill ribs in the backyard and play cards until midnight. It had shrunk over the years, as these things do. Now it was mostly Diane and Philip, their 2 adult children, a couple of cousins, and me. I almost didn't go. After everything Martin had told me, sitting across a patio table from Philip felt like something I'd need to prepare for. But Eleanor called me the week before and asked me to come. She said, "I want you there, Gerald. I want family there." I came. I arrived Friday evening. Rosa had made Eleanor's chicken and dumplings, which Carol used to request every Christmas. Eleanor hugged me for a long time at the door. She smelled like the same lavender soap she'd used for as long as I'd known her. Diane and Philip arrived Saturday morning. I was sitting on the back patio with a cup of coffee when I heard Philip's rental car in the driveway. I heard them come through the house, heard Philip's voice carrying that particular confidence of a man who believes every room has been waiting for him. He came through the sliding glass door and stopped when he saw me. "Gerald." He said my name like it was a mild inconvenience. "Philip." I lifted my coffee cup. He sat down across from me and looked out at Eleanor's backyard, at the saguaro cacti and the gravel landscaping and the old lemon tree in the corner that Carol used to pick fruit from when she was a girl. He had a look on his face that I can only describe as inventory, like he was calculating what things were worth. "Long drive?" I asked. "Flight," he said. "We flew in from Denver." Diane came out a few minutes later and gave me a hug that lasted about 1 second. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She said Carol would have wanted me to move on, to maybe think about downsizing, that rattling around in that big Ohio house alone couldn't be good for me. I nodded and drank my coffee. Their daughter, Kristen, came out and was perfectly pleasant. Their son, Marcus, shook my hand and asked about my truck, which surprised me. He seemed like a decent kid. I always thought the children were decent. It wasn't their doing. That afternoon, while Eleanor was resting, Philip found me in the garage looking at Eleanor's old workbench, the one that had been Carol's father's, covered in 30 years of careful organization, pegboard, and labeled drawers, and a vise that still worked perfectly. Philip stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "Gerald," he said, "I think we should talk practically about Eleanor's situation." I turned around and waited. "She's 81, he said. "The house is too big for her. Rosa's great, but Rosa isn't family. Diane and I have been talking about having Eleanor come to Denver to be closer to us. There's a beautiful continuing care community there, independent living, but with support when she needs it." I asked if Eleanor knew about this plan. Philip smiled the way people smile when they think you've asked a naive question. "We're going to discuss it with her this weekend. We think, once she understands the options—" "She has an attorney," I said. He paused. "Of course. And a trust that's been carefully structured," I said. "And she's been living independently in this house for 30 years, with no problems." Philip looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Gerald, you need to understand that you're not really part of this family's decisions anymore. Carol is gone. You were Carol's husband. That was your connection here. He said it calmly. Not cruelly. Exactly just the way you'd explain to someone which exit they should use. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Carol. I thought about the recliner next to the hospital bed. I thought about 31 years and 11 months. I thought about the trust documents Martin had explained to me and the record that Eleanor had already started building with her attorney's office. I said, "You're probably right, Philip. I'll let you get back to it." And I went back inside and helped Rosa set the table for dinner. That evening, Eleanor gathered everyone in the living room. This was slightly unusual. The reunion didn't normally include any formal gathering. Eleanor sat in her chair by the window, the one with the worn armrest that she refused to reupholster because Carol's father had bought it. Rosa stood near the kitchen door. I sat to Eleanor's left. Diane and Philip sat across. Eleanor said, "I want to talk about a few things while everyone is here. It feels like the right time." Diane immediately said, "Mom, maybe we should do this privately." "This is private," Eleanor said. "This is my family." She looked comfortable. More comfortable than I'd expected. "I've been aware," Eleanor said, "that there's been some concern about my future arrangements, about this house, about my finances." She looked at Diane, then at Philip. "I want to be clear that my affairs are fully in order and have been for some time. Martin has everything documented." Philip started to say something. Eleanor held up one hand, not rudely, just firmly, and he stopped. "I also want to be clear," Eleanor continued, "about who has been there for this family." She looked at me. "Gerald drove down here in February when I called him. He sat at my kitchen table and didn't panic and didn't make me feel afraid. He's been calling every Thursday since Carol passed, without me asking him to." She folded her hands in her lap. "Carol chose well. I've always known that," Diane said quietly. "Mom, we've been concerned about you too. That's why." "I know why," Eleanor said. "I know exactly why." There was a silence in the room that had weight to it. Eleanor said, "Martin will be joining us for breakfast tomorrow. I've asked him to come so that everyone can hear the same information at the same time. I think that's the cleanest way." Philip's jaw tightened. Just slightly, but I noticed it. Martin arrived at 9 the following morning, which was Sunday. He was a trim, unhurried man in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of calm that comes from decades of delivering news that people aren't prepared for. He set a leather portfolio on Eleanor's kitchen table and accepted a cup of Rosa's coffee and thanked her for it. Everyone sat down. Martin explained Eleanor's trust structure clearly and without drama. He explained what it covered, who was designated, and what the conditions were. He explained the undue influence clause in plain language. He explained that Eleanor had contacted his office in February, following an unsolicited visit, and that this contact had been documented. He explained that as a result of that documented contact, a review had been conducted. Philip said, "We were simply..." Martin said, "I know what the document you brought was, Mr. Philip. I've seen it." Diane had gone very still. Martin continued. He said that under the existing structure and given the documented events of February, Eleanor's estate, as currently constituted, would flow to Carol's line and through Carol, to me, along with a specific and significant bequest to Rosa for her 11 years of faithful service. He said Eleanor's charitable designations were also in place. He said that Diane remained in the trust in a limited capacity, as Eleanor had chosen, because Eleanor was a fair woman. But the primary disposition had not changed and would not change. Philip stood up. He said this was outrageous, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that bringing a document for someone's consideration was not undue influence, that he would contest this. Martin looked at him the way a man looks at weather he's seen before. "You're welcome to consult your own attorney," he said. "That is absolutely your right," Eleanor said. "Philip, please sit down." He sat down. After Martin left, Diane cried. I don't say that unkindly, she genuinely cried. And I think somewhere underneath all of it, she was grieving something real. She'd lost Carol too. She'd just handled that loss in the worst possible way, by letting Philip convince her that the answer was money. I went and sat with Eleanor on the back patio while the others were inside. The morning was already getting warm the way Scottsdale mornings do, that dry warmth that comes on fast. The lemon tree was putting out new growth. Eleanor said, "I'm sorry this weekend wasn't easier." I said, "It was fine, Eleanor." "Honestly," she said, "Carol trusted you with everything. Did you know that? She told me once that you were the only person in her life who never wanted anything from her." She paused. "I think that's the most you can say about a person." I drove home to Ohio on Monday. The F-150 made the same sound it always makes on the highway. That steady hum I've learned to read the way you learn to read a house settling. I stopped in Amarillo for gas and a terrible cup of coffee. I thought about Carol the whole way home. I thought about how she'd packed the trust documents the same way she packed everything carefully, completely, without calling attention to it. 3 weeks later, Philip sent an email through an attorney making noise about contesting the trust. Martin forwarded it to me with 2 sentences. The first sentence said that the legal basis for the challenge was extremely thin. The second sentence said not to worry about it. I didn't worry about it. Marcus, Diane's son, called me about a month after the reunion. He said he was sorry about how things had gone. He said his father had a way of turning every situation into a strategy, and that he'd grown up watching it and he didn't want to be that way himself. He asked if I'd be willing to stay in touch. I said yes, I meant it. Rosa sent me a card in June. She wrote, in careful handwriting, that Mrs. Eleanor was doing well and that the lemon tree had a good crop coming. She said Eleanor asked about me every Thursday. I still call every Thursday. I haven't changed anything about my life. I still drive the F-150. I still shop at Costco. The sneakers finally gave out in May, and I bought the same pair and a half size up. I still cut my own grass, though my neighbor's boy has been doing the back section since my knee started giving me trouble. Carol's mother is still sharp as a tack at 81. She still lives in the same house she's lived in for 30 years. Rosa is still there. The lemon tree is still producing. Some people thought I had nothing left after Carol died. No leverage, no position, no place at any table that mattered. Philip looked at me in that garage doorway and saw a retired shop teacher from Ohio in worn sneakers who had no more claim on anything. What he didn't see was 31 years of being the kind of man Carol could trust. What he didn't see was every Thursday phone call, every February drive, every hour in the recliner next to the hospital bed. What he didn't see was that Eleanor had watched all of it and remembered every single bit. You don't have to announce what you're worth. You just have to be it. Consistently. For long enough that the people who matter already know. Carol always said I was a patient man. She meant it as a compliment. She was right.